On July 6th, 2022, at exactly 4 a.m., someone walked up to one of America's most mysterious monuments and blew it to pieces. Within hours, the remaining structure was demolished by authorities, erasing 42 years of controversy, conspiracy theories, and unanswered questions. But here's what makes this story truly chilling. The person who destroyed the Georgia Guidestones might have done exactly what the monument's anonymous creator always intended. ConspiraNap been diving deep into one of the most disturbing mysteries in modern American history. What started as research into a simple granite monument in rural Georgia led down a rabbit hole of secret societies, population control theories, and a shadowy figure whose true identity remained hidden for decades. Tonight, you'll hear the complete story of the Georgia Guidestones, from their mysterious construction in 1980 to their violent destruction in 2022. But before we begin, I need you to understand something crucial. This isn't just another conspiracy theory video. Everything I'm about to share with you is documented fact, verified through official records, eyewitness testimony, and investigative journalism. The truth about the Georgia Guidestones is far stranger and more unsettling than any conspiracy theory ever imagined. If you're someone who appreciates deep investigations into mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about power, control, and hidden agendas, you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this story connects to current events in ways that will genuinely shock you. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why some people called these stones America's Stonehenge, while others branded them as monuments to evil itself. Now, let me take you back to a sweltering summer day in 1979, when a stranger walked into a small Georgia town and changed everything. The story begins in Elberton, Georgia, known as the granite capital of the world. Picture a quiet southern town where everybody knows everybody, where the biggest excitement usually comes from high school football games and church socials. The kind of place where a stranger asking questions gets noticed immediately. So when a well-dressed man in his late 50s walked into the offices of the Elberton Granite Finishing Company on a humid June morning in 1979, Joe Fendley, the company president, paid attention. The stranger introduced himself as Robert C. Christian, though something about the way he said it suggested this might not be his real name. He spoke with quiet authority, the kind of presence that comes from significant wealth and education. Christian explained that he represented a group of Americans who had been planning a very special project for 20 years. He wanted to commission a granite monument unlike anything ever built in the United States. What Christian described sounded impossible. He wanted 6 massive granite slabs arranged in a specific astronomical configuration with inscriptions in 8 different languages, built to last thousands of years. The structure would need to function as a celestial calendar with precise alignments to track the movement of stars, sun, and moon. This wasn't just a monument, it was an engineering marvel that would require consultation with astronomers and master stoneworkers. Joe Fendley listened to this elaborate proposal with growing skepticism. In his 30 years in the granite business, he'd never encountered anything remotely like this. Hoping to discourage what he assumed was either an elaborate prank or the fantasy of a wealthy eccentric, Fendley quoted an astronomical price for the project, several times higher than anything his company had ever undertaken. The quote was designed to make Christian walk away. Instead, Christian didn't even blink. He accepted the price immediately and asked about payment arrangements. This was Joe Fendley's first indication that he was dealing with something far beyond a typical customer with an unusual request. The man sitting across from him had access to serious money and was completely prepared to spend it on this mysterious project. But Christian had conditions. He insisted on complete anonymity for himself and his group. He wanted the monument built exactly to his specifications, with no deviation whatsoever. And most importantly, he wanted the project completed as quickly as possible, as if time was running out for something crucial. The financial arrangements were as mysterious as Christian himself. He worked through Wyatt Martin, president of the Granite City Bank, to establish an account for the project. Martin would later describe Christian as intelligent, well-spoken, and absolutely serious about maintaining his anonymity. Christian told Martin his real identity, but made him swear never to reveal it. All documentation related to the project was supposed to be destroyed once the monument was complete. The total cost exceeded $100,000 in 1980 money, equivalent to nearly $500,000 today. This represented an enormous investment for what Christian claimed was essentially a gift to humanity. The funding appeared immediately, with no financing needed, no lengthy approval processes, no corporate backing that could be traced. Whoever was behind this project had both significant wealth and the ability to move large sums of money without leaving obvious paper trails. Christian's choice of location was equally deliberate and mysterious. He didn't want the monument in a major city where it would be surrounded by urban development. Instead, he selected a 5-acre plot in rural Elbert County, approximately 7 miles north of Elberton. The site sat on a hill with commanding views to the east and west, in the middle of what was then a cow pasture. Christian purchased the land outright, granting the original owner lifetime grazing rights for his cattle. What Christian didn't publicize was the location's deeper significance. The site was near what Cherokee peoples had called Al-Yeli Elohi, meaning the center of the world, or whether Christian knew about this indigenous sacred connection is unclear, but his choice of location demonstrated remarkable attention to both practical and symbolic considerations. The design specifications Christian provided were extraordinary in their precision and complexity. The monument would consist of 4 massive upright granite slabs, each weighing over 20 tons and standing more than 16 feet tall. A central pillar would support a capstone, creating a structure that would weigh nearly 120 tons when complete. But these weren't just massive blocks of stone. They were precision instruments designed to track celestial movements with remarkable accuracy. The 4 outer stones would be oriented to mark the limits of the 18.6-year lunar declination cycle. The center column would feature a hole drilled at an angle from one side to the other, through which the North Star could be seen. The same pillar would have a slot carved through it, aligned with the sun's solstices and equinoxes. These astronomical features required consultation with professional astronomers and demonstrated that Christian had access to sophisticated technical knowledge. Creating these astronomical alignments required mathematical precision that went far beyond typical monument construction. The stones had to be positioned within fractions of degrees to function properly as celestial tracking devices. This suggested that Christian either possessed advanced knowledge of astronomy himself or had access to expert consultants who could provide the necessary calculations. The inscriptions represented perhaps the most controversial aspect of the entire project. Christian wanted a message carved into the granite in 8 different languages: English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, traditional Chinese, and Russian. The selection of languages was clearly intended to represent most of humanity, spanning different continents, cultures, and writing systems. Additionally, the capstone would bear an inscription in 4 ancient languages: Babylonian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphics, Sanskrit, and Classical Greek. The message itself consisted of 10 principles or guidelines for humanity. Christian described these as rational guidelines for a better world, principles that could help humanity navigate future challenges and create a more harmonious global civilization. He wanted the monument to serve as guidance for an age of reason, helping future generations avoid the mistakes of the past. But when the 10 principles were finally revealed, they sparked immediate controversy that would only intensify over the decades. The very first guideline called for maintaining humanity under 500 million people in perpetual balance with nature. Given that the world population in 1980 was approximately 4.4 billion people, This principle seemed to suggest that more than 90% of humanity would need to disappear for the guidelines to be implemented. Other principles included guiding reproduction wisely to improve fitness and diversity, uniting humanity with a living new language, establishing fair laws and just courts, creating a world court to resolve international disputes, and seeking harmony with the infinite. While some guidelines seemed benign or even admirable, others raised disturbing questions about who would have the authority to determine fitness and diversity in human reproduction, or what constituted fair laws for all humanity. The construction process itself was remarkable for its scale and precision. Master craftsmen worked for months to cut, shape, and position the massive granite slabs. Each letter and symbol had to be sandblasted into the stone with perfect accuracy, creating more than 4,000 individual characters, averaging 4 inches in height. The astronomical features required additional precision work, with holes and slots cut to exact specifications for celestial alignment. Throughout the construction process, Christian maintained his mysterious presence. He would appear periodically to check on progress, always arriving alone and never staying long. Workers described him as polite but distant, clearly knowledgeable about the project's technical requirements, but unwilling to discuss his motivations or background. He seemed to be operating under some kind of deadline, frequently asking about completion schedules and expressing urgency about finishing the work. On March 22, 1980, the Georgia Guidestones were officially unveiled to the public. The dedication ceremony was attended by local officials, curious residents, and media representatives, but Christian himself was notably absent. He had completed his mission and disappeared as mysteriously as he had arrived, leaving behind only his monument and a growing list of questions about his true identity and motivations. The immediate public reaction was mixed, ranging from curiosity and admiration to suspicion and outright hostility. Some visitors saw the Guidestones as an impressive achievement, a unique combination of art, engineering, and philosophy. Others were disturbed by the population control implications and the monument's anonymous origins. Local residents found themselves divided between pride in their community's new landmark and unease about its mysterious message. But the controversy was just beginning. As word spread about the monument's existence and its 10 controversial principles, the Georgia Guidestones began attracting attention from conspiracy theorists, religious groups, and political activists who saw sinister meanings in its message. The monument's anonymous origins only fueled speculation about secret societies, global conspiracies, and hidden agendas for world domination. What none of the early visitors could have predicted was how the monument would become a lightning rod for decades of controversy, vandalism, and increasingly extreme opposition. The mysterious R.C. Christian had created more than just a granite monument. He had built a focal point for America's deepest fears about globalization, population control, and secret power structures. The Georgia Guidestones stood for 42 years, weathering storms both literal and figurative. They survived acts of vandalism, political campaigns calling for their destruction, and growing hostility from extremist groups who branded them as satanic symbols of a coming new world order. Through it all, the monument's message remained unchanged, carved in stone for anyone willing to read and interpret its meaning. But on that July morning in 2022, someone decided that the message had been displayed long enough. The explosion that destroyed one of the massive slabs was just the beginning of the end for America's most controversial monument. Within hours, the remaining structure would be demolished, closing a chapter in American history that had raised more questions than it ever answered. The destruction of the Georgia Guidestones marked the end of one mystery, but opened the door to even deeper questions. Who was the person who planted that explosive device? What motivated them to destroy a monument that had stood for over 4 decades? And perhaps most importantly, did the destruction fulfill some hidden purpose that R.C. Christian had planned from the very beginning? To understand why someone would plant a bomb at the Georgia Guidestones in 2022, we need to examine how the monument became a symbol of everything certain Americans feared most about globalization, secret societies, and population control. The transformation from mysterious landmark to target of extremist hatred didn't happen overnight. It was a slow burn that took decades to reach its explosive conclusion. From the moment of their unveiling, the Guidestones attracted visitors who fell into distinct categories. There were curious tourists drawn by the monument's reputation as America's Stonehenge. There were researchers fascinated by the astronomical features and engineering precision. There were New Age spiritualists who saw the monument as a sacred site for meditation and ritual. And there were conspiracy theorists who believed they had discovered physical evidence of a global plot to control humanity. The conspiracy theories began almost immediately, fueled by the monument's anonymous origins and controversial message. The pseudonym R.C. Christian itself became a source of speculation. Some theorists claimed it referenced the Rosicrucians, a secret society dating back to medieval Europe that emphasized reason, harmony with nature, and hidden knowledge. Others suggested connections to the Rose Cross, Christian mysticism, or even more modern secret societies like the Illuminati. The population control message proved especially inflammatory. That first principle calling for maintaining humanity under 500 million people struck many observers as a blueprint for genocide on an unprecedented scale. Critics calculated that implementing this guideline would require the elimination of more than 90% of the world's population. They demanded to know who would make such decisions, how such reductions would be achieved, and what gave anyone the right to determine how many people should be allowed to exist. Religious opposition emerged quickly and intensely. Conservative Christian groups denounced the monument as satanic, pointing to its anonymous origins, population control message, and references to creating a new language for humanity. They saw these elements as fulfilling biblical prophecies about the end times, when a global government would arise to control all aspects of human life. The monument's call for a world court and international governance only reinforced these fears. The first serious act of vandalism occurred in 2008, when someone spray-painted graffiti across the stones, including slogans like, "Death to the New World Order." This marked a turning point from theoretical opposition to actual physical attacks on the monument. The vandalism required expensive cleaning and restoration, but more importantly, it demonstrated that some people's hatred for the Guidestones had moved beyond words to action. Security cameras were installed after the 2008 incident, but they didn't stop future attacks. In 2014, the stones were again vandalized with graffiti, including the phrase, "I am Isis, goddess of love." The FBI was called in to investigate, treating the vandalism as a potential federal crime due to the monument's location on private property and its significance as a landmark. But it was the rise of internet conspiracy theories that truly weaponized opposition to the Georgia Guidestones. Online forums and websites began promoting increasingly extreme interpretations of the monument's purpose and meaning. Conspiracy theorist Mark Dice emerged as one of the most vocal opponents, demanding that the satanic Guidestones be smashed into a million pieces. His YouTube videos and social media posts reached thousands of followers, spreading anti-Guidestones messaging far beyond Georgia. Alex Jones, the controversial host of InfoWars, visited the monument in 2020 and declared it a temple to the post-human era. His broadcast reached millions of viewers who were already primed to believe in global conspiracies involving population control, government overreach, and secret societies. Jones connected the Guidestones to contemporary fears about vaccines, lockdowns, and what he claimed was a deliberate effort to reduce world population through medical interventions. The COVID-19 pandemic supercharged these conspiracy theories. As governments implemented public health measures including mask mandates, social distancing, and vaccination campaigns, some people saw these actions as evidence that the population control agenda outlined on the Georgia Guidestones was being implemented in real time. The timing seemed too perfect to be coincidental, a global pandemic requiring unprecedented government intervention, followed by a massive vaccination campaign affecting billions of people worldwide. Social media algorithms amplified these theories, creating echo chambers where opposition to the Guidestones could flourish without challenge. Facebook groups, YouTube channels, and Twitter accounts dedicated to exposing the truth about the monument attracted thousands of followers. The content became increasingly extreme, with some posts suggesting that destroying the Guidestones would strike a blow against global tyranny. The political weaponization of the Georgia Guidestones reached its peak during the 2022 Georgia gubernatorial primary. Candace Taylor, a long-shot candidate running on a platform of Jesus, guns and babies, made destroying the monument a central campaign promise. Her campaign videos featured ominous music and drone footage of the Guidestones, while Taylor spoke about Luciferian cabals and satanic symbols threatening Christian America. Taylor's campaign represented something unprecedented. A mainstream political candidate openly calling for the destruction of a private monument based on conspiracy theories. Her proposed executive order was simple and direct. Demolish the Georgia Guidestones. She claimed that the monument represented Satan worship and connected it to contemporary fears about vaccines, abortion, and global government control. The candidate's messaging skillfully combined religious themes with political grievances and conspiracy theories. She portrayed the Guidestones as physical evidence of a spiritual war between good and evil, with the monument serving as a rallying point for forces seeking to destroy Christian civilization. Her campaign videos went viral on social media, reaching far beyond Georgia voters to a national audience hungry for someone willing to take direct action against perceived threats. While Taylor finished a distant third in the Republican primary, her campaign had succeeded in something more significant than winning votes. She had normalized the idea that the Georgia Guidestones deserved to be destroyed, transforming what had been fringe conspiracy theories into mainstream political discourse. Her rhetoric provided ideological justification for someone willing to take matters into their own hands. The escalating rhetoric wasn't limited to political campaigns. Online discussions about the Guidestones became increasingly violent, with some users openly calling for bombing or demolishing the monument. Social media posts described detailed scenarios for destroying the stones, discussed the type of explosives that would be most effective, and celebrated the idea of erasing what they saw as a symbol of evil. Law enforcement agencies were aware of the growing threats against the monument, but protecting a granite structure in rural Georgia presented unique challenges. The site was isolated, making round-the-clock security expensive and difficult to maintain. The monument sat on private property, limiting law enforcement's ability to establish a permanent presence. And the nature of the threats made it difficult to distinguish between angry rhetoric and serious intentions to commit violence. The Elbert County Sheriff's Office increased patrols around the monument, especially after high-profile social media posts or political campaigns that mentioned the Guidestones. But with limited resources and competing priorities, they couldn't maintain constant surveillance of the site. The security cameras installed after earlier vandalism incidents provided some deterrent effect, but they couldn't prevent a determined individual from approaching the monument under cover of darkness. Local residents found themselves caught in the middle of an increasingly polarized debate about their community's most famous landmark. Some took pride in the Guidestones as a unique attraction that brought tourists and attention to rural Elbert County. Others shared the concerns about the monument's message and anonymous origins, wishing it had never been built in their community. Many simply wanted the controversy to end, regardless of how that happened. The tourism industry around the Guidestones reflected these divisions. Tour groups would arrive to see America's Stonehenge, with guides explaining the astronomical features and mysterious origins. But increasingly, visitors came because they had heard about the monument through conspiracy theory websites or social media posts. Some arrived seeking spiritual experiences, while others came to document what they saw as evidence of global conspiracies. Gift shops in nearby Elberton sold Guidestones merchandise alongside traditional granite products, but the tone of visitor conversations grew darker over time. Instead of asking about the engineering techniques or astronomical alignments, visitors wanted to know about population control theories, secret societies, and whether local residents believed the conspiracy theories about the monument's true purpose. The monument's 40th anniversary in 2020 passed with little fanfare, overshadowed by pandemic restrictions and growing political tensions. But behind the scenes, law enforcement agencies were tracking increased online chatter about potential attacks on the Guidestones. The combination of political rhetoric, conspiracy theories, and social media amplification had created a perfect storm of motivation for someone willing to take violent action. Intelligence analysts noted that the Guidestones had become a symbol that unified various extremist movements around shared opposition to globalization, population control, and secret government. The monument appeared regularly in QAnon posts, white nationalist forums, and anti-government websites as evidence of the threats facing traditional American values. This convergence of different conspiracy communities around a single target created what experts recognized as a dangerous situation. The security footage from July 6, 2022, captured the moment when years of escalating rhetoric finally translated into action. A lone figure approached the monument in the pre-dawn darkness, placed an explosive device at the base of one of the massive granite slabs, and retreated to a waiting vehicle. The explosion that followed was powerful enough to completely destroy one of the four main stones, sending chunks of granite flying across the monument site. The bomber's choice of timing suggested careful planning and knowledge of local security patterns. 4 a.m. represented the darkest and quietest time of night, when the chances of being observed were minimal. The quick retreat to a vehicle indicated advanced preparation and possibly surveillance of the site to determine the best approach and escape routes. But the destruction of a single stone wasn't the end of the story. Within hours of the bombing, local authorities made a decision that completed what the bomber had started. Citing safety concerns about the structural integrity of the remaining stones, they ordered the complete demolition of the Georgia Guidestones. By the end of July 6, 2022, the monument that had stood for 42 years was reduced to rubble. The decision to demolish the remaining structure sparked immediate debate about whether authorities had acted too hastily. Some critics argued that proper engineering analysis should have been conducted to determine if the monument could be repaired or partially preserved. Others suggested that the quick demolition served the bomber's purposes perfectly, achieving total destruction when the original explosion had only damaged part of the structure. The complete demolition raised uncomfortable questions about whether the authorities had inadvertently become accomplices to an act of domestic terrorism. Did the bomber know that destroying just one stone would trigger the demolition of the entire monument? Was this always part of the plan? The speed with which the remaining structure was torn down suggested either poor crisis management or a predetermined decision to use any excuse to finally remove the controversial landmark. Local residents watched in stunned silence as heavy machinery reduced 4 decades of mystery to a pile of broken granite. Some felt relief that the source of so much controversy was finally gone. Others mourned the loss of their community's most famous landmark, regardless of their feelings about its message. Many simply felt manipulated, as if their community had been used as a stage for someone else's ideological warfare. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation launched an immediate manhunt for the bomber, releasing surveillance footage that showed both the explosion and a vehicle fleeing the scene. The video quality was surprisingly clear, capturing the perpetrator's general build and movements, as well as details about the getaway car. Yet despite having visual evidence and significant law enforcement resources dedicated to the case, investigators made no arrests in the days and weeks following the bombing. The lack of progress in identifying the bomber became increasingly puzzling as time passed. The surveillance footage provided clear images of both the individual and their vehicle. The explosive device would have required specific knowledge and materials that could potentially be traced. The bombing occurred at a high-profile target that had been under increased scrutiny from law enforcement agencies. Yet somehow, the perpetrator seemed to have vanished without leaving any investigative leads. Theories about the bomber's identity ranged from local extremists motivated by political rhetoric to sophisticated operatives working for unknown organizations. Some investigators suspected the attack was carried out by someone with military or law enforcement training, given the precision of the operation and the clean escape. Others believed it was the work of an amateur who simply got lucky and benefited from the isolated location and early morning timing. The investigation's lack of progress fueled additional conspiracy theories about the bombing itself. Some online commentators suggested that government agencies had deliberately allowed the attack to proceed, viewing the controversial monument as more trouble than it was worth. Others claimed that the bombing was a false flag operation designed to justify increased surveillance and restrictions on domestic dissent. More disturbing were the celebrations that erupted across social media platforms following news of the monument's destruction. Candace Taylor, the gubernatorial candidate who had campaigned on demolishing the Guidestones, posted messages suggesting that divine intervention had accomplished what human authorities had failed to do. Her supporters shared images of the destroyed monument with celebratory commentary about God's judgment on satanic symbols. The religious framing of the bombing's aftermath revealed how deeply the opposition to the Guidestones had become embedded in certain interpretations of Christianity. Some pastors delivered sermons describing the monument's destruction as evidence of God's power over evil forces. Online religious communities shared testimonials about praying for the Guidestones' removal and claiming credit for their prayers being answered through divine action. But the celebration wasn't limited to religious communities. Political activists who had long opposed globalization and international cooperation saw the bombing as a victory against symbolic representations of world government. Anti-vaccine activists connected the destruction to their opposition to global health initiatives. Various conspiracy theory communities claimed vindication for their warnings about the monument's true purpose. The speed with which the Guidestones disappeared from public consciousness after their destruction was almost as remarkable as their controversial existence. News coverage of the bombing lasted only a few days before being overshadowed by other events. The investigation faded from media attention despite remaining officially active. Within weeks, it was as if the monument had never existed at all. This rapid forgetting served the interests of multiple parties who had grown tired of the controversy surrounding the Guidestones. Local officials no longer had to deal with security concerns, protest activities, and negative publicity associated with the monument. State politicians could avoid uncomfortable questions about population control theories and secret societies. Even tourism operators found it easier to promote other attractions without having to navigate the complex politics surrounding their most famous landmark. But the destruction of the Georgia Guidestones also eliminated a unique piece of American history that deserved preservation regardless of political opinions about its message. The monument represented a fascinating intersection of art, engineering, astronomy, and philosophy that had no equivalent anywhere else in the United States. Its astronomical features alone made it worthy of study and protection as a scientific instrument. The craftsmanship that went into creating the Guidestones was irreplaceable. Master stoneworkers had spent months cutting, shaping, and positioning the massive granite slabs with precision that would be difficult and expensive to replicate today. The astronomical alignments required mathematical calculations and physical positioning that represented a significant achievement in monument construction. From an anthropological perspective, The Guidestones served as a remarkable time capsule of late 20th century anxieties about nuclear war, overpopulation, and environmental destruction. The 10 principles carved into the stone reflected genuine concerns about humanity's future that resonated with many people, even if they disagreed with specific proposals for addressing those challenges. The linguistic achievement of the monument was equally significant. Translating complex philosophical concepts into 8 different languages while maintaining consistency and clarity across diverse writing systems required extensive consultation with linguistic experts. The inclusion of ancient languages on the capstone connected the monument to humanity's deep historical roots and demonstrated remarkable attention to cultural heritage. Even the conspiracy theories that surrounded the Guidestones represented an important phenomenon worthy of study rather than destruction. The monument had become a focal point for understanding how fears about globalization, population control, and secret power structures manifest in American political culture. Destroying it eliminated a valuable case study in how conspiracy theories develop and spread. The astronomical features of the monument provided educational opportunities that extended far beyond political controversies. School groups had visited the site to learn about celestial mechanics, seasonal changes, and the relationship between human civilization and cosmic cycles. The precision of the stone alignments offered hands-on demonstrations of concepts that are difficult to teach in traditional classroom settings. Local historians recognize that the Guidestones had become an integral part of their community's identity, regardless of opinions about the monument's message. The structure had appeared in countless photographs, videos, and written accounts that documented life in rural Georgia during the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Its destruction erased a landmark that had helped define their community's place in broader American culture. The economic impact of losing the monument was immediately apparent to local business owners who had benefited from Guidestones tourism. Gift shops, restaurants, and hotels in the Elberton area had relied on visitors drawn by the monument's mysterious reputation and controversial message. The bombing eliminated this source of revenue while providing no alternative attractions to replace the lost tourism dollars. But perhaps the most troubling aspect of the monument's destruction was what it revealed about the current state of American political discourse. The fact that sustained conspiracy theory campaigns and political rhetoric could culminate in an actual bombing suggested that the boundaries between online extremism and real-world violence had dangerously eroded. The Guidestones bombing occurred during a period of increased domestic terrorism threats across the United States. Federal law enforcement agencies had been warning about the growing radicalization of individuals exposed to conspiracy theories through social media platforms and extremist websites. The monument's destruction fit a pattern of attacks on symbols associated with government authority, global cooperation, and cultural change. The celebration of the bombing by political figures and religious leaders normalized violence as an acceptable response to ideological disagreements. When candidates for major political offices openly call for destroying monuments and then celebrate when unknown perpetrators carry out those attacks, it sends a dangerous message about the legitimacy of vigilante action against controversial symbols. The failure to solve the case after more than 2 years has implications that extend far beyond the specific incident. If domestic terrorists can bomb high-profile targets, escape without identification, and receive public celebration for their actions, it encourages others to believe that similar attacks might be successful and worthwhile. The investigation's lack of progress has become a source of frustration for law enforcement professionals who recognize the broader implications of an unsolved domestic terrorism case. The bombing demonstrated that determined individuals could successfully attack symbolic targets, even when those targets were under surveillance and had been the subject of public threats. The technical aspects of the bombing suggested someone with knowledge of explosives and careful planning capabilities. The device was powerful enough to completely destroy a massive granite slab while being small enough for one person to carry and place quickly. The timing of the attack and rapid escape indicated advanced surveillance and route planning, Yet despite these indicators of sophisticated preparation, the bomber managed to avoid leaving evidence that could lead to identification. This suggests either exceptional operational security or significant gaps in the investigative response. Either possibility raises concerns about law enforcement's ability to prevent and solve similar attacks in the future. The Georgia Guidestones case has become a teaching example in domestic terrorism analysis, illustrating how online radicalization can translate into real-world violence against symbolic targets. The progression from conspiracy theories to political rhetoric to actual bombing provides a clear timeline of escalation that investigators now watch for in other cases involving controversial monuments or symbols. The monument's destruction also eliminated what had become an important barometer for measuring the intensity of extremist sentiment in American political culture. The Guidestones had served as a lightning rod that attracted and concentrated opposition from various conspiracy theory communities. Monitoring activity around the monument had provided insights into the mood and intentions of these groups. Intelligence analysts had used the Guidestones as a case study for understanding how different extremist movements could unite around shared opposition to specific symbols. The monument appeared regularly in content produced by anti-government groups, religious extremists, white nationalists, and various conspiracy theory communities. This convergence around a single target provided valuable intelligence about how these movements communicate and coordinate. The loss of this intelligence-gathering opportunity came at a particularly sensitive time when domestic terrorism threats were already increasing across the United States. Law enforcement agencies needed better understanding of how extremist groups identify and target symbols for attack, but the destruction of their most prominent case study eliminated a valuable source of information. The bombing also demonstrated the vulnerability of private monuments and memorials to ideologically motivated attacks. Unlike government buildings or military installations, private landmarks typically lack sophisticated security systems or dedicated protection details. The Guidestones had only basic surveillance cameras and occasional patrol visits, making them a relatively easy target for determined attackers. This vulnerability extends to thousands of other monuments, memorials, and symbolic structures across the United States that could become targets for individuals or groups motivated by political or religious extremism. The successful attack on the Guidestones provides a template that could be replicated against other controversial symbols. The investigation into the bombing revealed significant challenges in protecting isolated landmarks from domestic terrorism. Rural locations make constant surveillance expensive and difficult to maintain. Limited law enforcement resources in small communities mean that response times may be inadequate to prevent attacks or apprehend perpetrators. The isolation that makes monuments like the Guidestones attractive to visitors also makes them vulnerable to attack. But the most disturbing aspect of the entire episode may be how quickly American society moved on from what should have been recognized as a serious domestic terrorism incident. The bombing of the Georgia Guidestones represented an escalation in politically motivated violence that deserved sustained attention and investigation. Instead, it became just another news story that disappeared from public consciousness within days. This collective amnesia about domestic terrorism incidents creates an environment where future attacks become more likely. When bombings are quickly forgotten and investigations stall without resolution, it sends a message that such actions may be consequence-free. The failure to solve high-profile cases like the Guidestones bombing undermines deterrence and potentially encourages copycat attacks. The story of the Georgia Guidestones, from their mysterious construction to their violent destruction, serves as a mirror reflecting America's deepest anxieties about power, control, and hidden agendas. But it also reveals something darker about our current political moment. The willingness to use violence against symbols we disagree with, and the collective decision to forget when that violence occurs. The question that haunts me as I've researched this case isn't just who bombed the Georgia Guidestones, but whether their destruction revealed something even more sinister about the monument's original purpose. Because when you dig deep enough into R.C. Christian's true identity and motivations, you discover that the bombing might have accomplished exactly what he intended from the very beginning. For decades, the mystery of R.C. Christian's identity remained one of the most compelling aspects of the Guidestones story. Wyatt Martin, the banker who held Christian's secrets, had promised to take that information to his grave. Local investigators had pursued various leads without success. Amateur sleuths had proposed dozens of theories about Christian's true identity, ranging from wealthy philanthropists to secret society leaders to government operatives working on classified projects. The breakthrough came through an unexpected source, a documentary filmmaker who managed to convince the aging Wyatt Martin to reveal more than he had ever intended. In 2015, Christian Pinto was working on a film about the Guidestones when he gained Martin's trust and discovered something remarkable. Despite his promise to destroy all documentation related to the project, Martin had secretly preserved the records in his basement for 35 years. Those preserved documents contained return addresses, postal markings, and other clues that investigators had never seen before. Most significantly, many of the letters from R.C. Christian had been mailed from Fort Dodge, Iowa. This geographical connection became the key that finally unlocked the mystery of Christian's identity, leading investigators to a man whose background was far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The evidence pointed to Herbert Hinsey Kirsten, a physician who had practiced in Fort Dodge for decades before his death in 2005. The circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Kirsten's age matched Christian's claimed age in documented correspondence. His hometown matched the postal markings on Christian's letters. His documented writings about population control mirrored the themes expressed in the Guidestones principles with remarkable precision. But it was Kirsten's ideology that truly explained the sinister nature of the Georgia Guidestones project. This wasn't a benevolent philanthropist trying to guide humanity toward a better future. This was a man whose writings revealed deep connections to eugenics movements and population control theories that echoed some of the darkest chapters in 20th century history. Kirsten had written extensively about what he called the overpopulation crisis, arguing that drastic measures would be necessary to prevent human civilization from destroying itself through uncontrolled breeding. His published works compared humanity to a fleet of overcrowded lifeboats, suggesting that difficult decisions about who deserved to survive would eventually become necessary for the greater good of the species. More disturbing were Kirsten's views about healthcare rationing and social engineering. He argued that medical care should be distributed based on individuals' value to society rather than their need for treatment. He supported policies that would favor certain genetic traits, while discouraging reproduction among those he considered less fit for survival. These weren't abstract philosophical discussions. They were detailed proposals for implementing eugenic policies in modern society. The connection between Kirsten's documented beliefs and the principles carved into the Georgia Guidestones was undeniable. The monument's call for maintaining humanity under 500 million people wasn't a distant aspiration. It was a specific target that would require eliminating more than 90% of the world's current population. The guideline about guiding reproduction wisely to improve fitness and diversity used language directly from eugenics literature. Kirsten's writings also revealed concerning connections to white supremacist ideologies. He had praised political figures known for their racist views and had argued that immigration to the United States should be restricted to preserve what he saw as superior genetic characteristics. His vision of population control wasn't colorblind. It was explicitly designed to favor certain racial and ethnic groups while reducing others. The implications of this discovery transformed the entire narrative around the Georgia Guidestones. What had been presented as rational guidelines for humanity's future was revealed as a monument to eugenic ideology built by a man who believed that most of the human race was expendable. The monument's anonymous origins weren't designed to protect a benevolent philanthropist. They were meant to hide the identity of someone whose views would have been immediately recognized as dangerous and extremist. This revelation also explained the monument's sophisticated construction and astronomical features. Kirsten wasn't working alone. He represented what he claimed was a group of like-minded individuals who had been planning this project for 20 years. The precision of the monument's design and the substantial financial resources required suggested an organized network rather than a single wealthy eccentric. The group that Kirsten represented appeared to view the Georgia Guidestones as more than just a philosophical statement. The monument was designed to survive potential civilizational collapse, serving as guidance for whoever might emerge from global catastrophe. The astronomical features would allow future survivors to track time and seasons, even if modern technology was lost. The multiple languages ensured that the message could be understood by diverse populations. But the most chilling aspect of this revelation was the timing. Kirsten and his associates built the monument during the height of Cold War tensions, when nuclear war seemed like a real possibility. They weren't just advocating for population reduction in the abstract. They were preparing for a world where such reduction might occur through nuclear holocaust. The Guidestones were designed to serve as the instruction manual for rebuilding civilization according to eugenic principles. The monument's message about creating a world court and establishing fair laws took on sinister meanings when viewed through this lens. Who would staff this world court? What would constitute fair laws in a post-apocalyptic world where survival was paramount? The answers seemed clear when you understood Kirsten's belief that only certain types of people deserve to inherit the earth. The call for a living new language to unite humanity also revealed deeper purposes. Language shapes thought, and controlling language means controlling how people understand their world. The proposal to replace existing languages with a new global tongue would eliminate cultural diversity and historical connections that might challenge the new order's authority. Even the monument's location in rural Georgia took on new significance. The site wasn't chosen randomly. It was positioned to survive potential nuclear attacks on major population centers while remaining accessible to whoever might emerge from the aftermath. The astronomical alignments would help survivors re-establish calendars and agricultural cycles necessary for rebuilding civilization. The preservation of the monument through massive granite construction wasn't just about creating an impressive landmark. It was about ensuring that the eugenic principles would survive even if the civilization that created them was destroyed. Future generations would discover the Guidestones and potentially interpret them as wisdom from their ancestors, rather than the ideological agenda of a small group of extremists. This understanding of the monument's true purpose cast the conspiracy theories surrounding it in a different light. The religious groups who branded it as satanic weren't entirely wrong. They had recognized something fundamentally evil about the monument's message, even without knowing the full details of its origins. The population control fears weren't paranoid delusions. They were accurate readings of the monument's intended purpose. The political opposition that eventually led to the monument's destruction represented a genuine grassroots response to something that people instinctively recognized as threatening to their values and survival. The fact that this opposition took decades to build suggested that the monument's creators had successfully hidden their true intentions behind carefully crafted language and anonymous origins. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. The revelation of Kirsten's identity and ideology raises disturbing questions about whether the monument's destruction was actually part of the original plan. Consider the timing. The bombing occurred just as investigative journalists were finally unraveling the mystery of R.C. Christian's identity and exposing the eugenic ideology behind the project. The monument had served its purpose for over 40 years, spreading awareness of population control ideas and creating a focal point for like-minded individuals to gather and organize. By 2022, the principles carved into the stone had been photographed, translated, and distributed across the internet millions of times. The physical structure was no longer necessary to preserve the message. More importantly, the monument had become a liability as investigators closed in on the truth about its origins. The exposure of Kirsten's identity and ideology would have permanently associated the Guidestones with eugenics and white supremacy, destroying any credibility the project might have retained. The bombing eliminated this problem by creating a narrative of victimhood and martyrdom around the monument's message. The fact that the bomber has never been identified despite clear surveillance footage raises questions about whether this was truly a random act of domestic terrorism or something more carefully orchestrated. The precision of the attack, the timing of the escape, and the complete lack of investigative progress suggest either exceptional luck or significant planning and resources. Consider also the immediate decision to demolish the remaining structure, rather than attempting repair or preservation. Local authorities acted with remarkable speed to erase all physical traces of the monument, eliminating any possibility of forensic analysis or reconstruction. This decision served the interests of multiple parties who wanted the controversy to disappear permanently. The celebration of the bombing by political figures and conspiracy theorists created a perfect cover story for what might have been a planned destruction. By framing the attack as righteous opposition to satanic symbols, the true perpetrators could hide behind a narrative of grassroots resistance while achieving their actual goal of eliminating evidence before it became too damaging. The rapid disappearance of the story from news coverage and public consciousness also suggests coordination rather than natural forgetting. Major domestic terrorism incidents typically generate sustained investigation and media attention, but the Guidestones bombing was quickly overshadowed by other events and allowed to fade from memory. This possibility that the monument's destruction was orchestrated by the same forces that created it reveals the sophisticated nature of the entire operation. The Georgia Guidestones weren't just a monument to eugenic ideology. They were part of a decades-long psychological operation designed to gradually introduce population control concepts into mainstream discourse. The anonymous origins created mystery and intrigue that drew attention to the monument's message. The controversial principles sparked debates that spread awareness of population control arguments. The conspiracy theories that surrounded the structure created communities of believers who might not have encountered these ideas through traditional channels. For 42 years, the Guidestones served as a recruitment tool and propaganda platform for eugenic ideology. They provided a physical focal point for people who shared concerns about overpopulation, environmental destruction, and social decline. The monument's impressive construction and mysterious origins gave credibility to ideas that might otherwise have been dismissed as extremist propaganda. The astronomical features and multiple languages suggested advanced knowledge and global perspective, lending authority to the monument's message. The rural Georgia location made it seem authentically American rather than foreign propaganda. The anonymous funding and construction demonstrated that wealthy, powerful people supported these ideas even if they couldn't publicly endorse them. But by 2022, the monument had outlived its usefulness and become a dangerous liability. The investigation into R.C. Christian's identity threatened to expose the entire operation and associate it with discredited eugenic movements. The growing political opposition suggested that public sentiment was turning decisively against the monument's message. The bombing provided a perfect solution to this problem. It eliminated the physical evidence while creating a narrative of persecution that could be used to generate sympathy for the monument's principles. The attack could be blamed on religious extremists or political radicals, while the true perpetrators remained hidden behind layers of misdirection and false narratives. The failure to solve the case serves multiple purposes for those who orchestrated the destruction. It maintains the illusion that this was a spontaneous act of domestic terrorism rather than a planned operation. It prevents investigation into the monument's true origins and funding sources. It allows the eugenic ideology to survive while distancing it from its most visible symbol. The collective amnesia about the bombing ensures that the monument's destruction won't inspire too much scrutiny or investigation. By allowing the story to fade quickly from public consciousness, the perpetrators avoid sustained attention that might reveal their true identities and motivations. This analysis suggests that the Georgia Guidestones bombing represents something far more sophisticated than simple domestic terrorism. It may have been the final act in a decades-long operation designed to spread eugenic ideology while maintaining plausible deniability for its sponsors. The monument served its purpose and was then eliminated to prevent exposure of the larger network behind it. The implications of this possibility extend far beyond a single destroyed monument in rural Georgia. If the Guidestones bombing was indeed orchestrated by the same forces that created the monument, it demonstrates the existence of long-term operations designed to influence American political discourse through psychological manipulation and strategic violence. The techniques used in the Guidestones operation could be replicated with other controversial symbols and messages. Anonymous funding could create mysterious monuments or installations that generate debate and spread specific ideologies. Conspiracy theories could be deliberately cultivated to create communities of believers around particular ideas. Strategic destruction could eliminate evidence while creating martyrdom narratives. The success of the Guidestones operation in maintaining anonymity and avoiding accountability for over 4 decades suggests that similar projects might already be underway. The same networks that funded and built the monument could be working on other long-term influence operations designed to shape American culture and politics in subtle but significant ways. The failure of law enforcement and intelligence agencies to uncover the truth about the Guidestones bombing raises questions about their ability to detect and counter such sophisticated operations. If domestic terrorists can successfully attack symbolic targets and escape without identification, it suggests serious gaps in security and investigative capabilities. The normalization of political violence represented by the celebration of the bombing creates an environment where future operations become more likely to succeed. When public figures openly call for destroying controversial symbols and then celebrate when unknown perpetrators carry out those attacks, it provides perfect cover for organized operations masquerading as spontaneous extremism. The lesson of the Georgia Guidestones isn't just about one mysterious monument and its violent end. It's about the vulnerability of democratic societies to long-term manipulation by well-funded, patient adversaries who understand how to exploit our political divisions and cultural anxieties for their own purposes. The 42-year lifespan of the Guidestones demonstrates that such operations can succeed in hiding their true nature for decades while gradually influencing public discourse and political movements. The monument's destruction shows how evidence can be eliminated and investigations stalled when the perpetrators have sufficient resources and planning capabilities. But perhaps most disturbing is the realization that we may never know the full truth about who was behind the Georgia Guidestones project and whether their destruction was planned from the beginning. The people responsible for this operation have successfully maintained their anonymity and avoided accountability for their actions. The eugenic ideology that inspired the monument hasn't disappeared with its destruction. Those principles continue to circulate online and influence political movements that seek to control population growth, restrict immigration, and eliminate people they consider unfit for society. The Guidestones may be gone, but their message lives on in forms that are harder to identify and counter. The investigation into the monument's bombing remains officially active, but the lack of progress after more than 2 years suggests that the case may never be solved. The perpetrators have successfully covered their tracks and eliminated the evidence that might have exposed their true identities and motivations. This failure represents more than just one unsolved crime. It demonstrates the limitations of our security and intelligence systems when confronting sophisticated, well-funded operations that operate over extended time periods. The techniques used in the Guidestones operation could be applied to other targets and objectives without fear of detection or accountability. The story of the Georgia Guidestones serves as a warning about the vulnerability of democratic societies to manipulation by hidden networks with long-term agendas. It shows how anonymous funding, mysterious origins, and strategic violence can be used to spread dangerous ideologies while maintaining plausible deniability for their sponsors. But the story isn't over yet. The investigation continues, and new evidence could still emerge that finally reveals the truth about who was really behind the monument and its destruction. The digital age makes it harder to maintain complete anonymity, and the techniques used by the Guidestones operation might eventually be traced back to their sources. Until then, we're left with questions that may never be fully answered, and a destroyed monument that took its secrets with it into rubble. The Georgia Guidestones represented one of the most successful long-term influence operations in American history, and their destruction may have been the final masterpiece of whoever orchestrated the entire decades-long project. The true legacy of the Georgia Guidestones isn't just the controversy they generated or the conspiracy theories they inspired. It's the demonstration that patient, well-funded adversaries can successfully manipulate American political discourse for decades while maintaining complete anonymity and avoiding accountability for their actions. That lesson remains relevant today as we confront new forms of information warfare, psychological manipulation, and strategic violence designed to undermine democratic institutions and spread dangerous ideologies. The techniques pioneered in the Guidestones operation continue to threaten our society in ways we're only beginning to understand. The bombing that destroyed America's most mysterious monument may have eliminated one symbol of eugenic ideology, but it also demonstrated the power of those who remain hidden in the shadows, pulling strings and shaping events according to their own twisted vision of humanity's future. The war between those who seek to control population growth through violence and manipulation and those who defend human dignity and democratic values continues, with the stakes higher than ever before. The aftermath of the Georgia Guidestones bombing reveals something even more troubling about how quickly we've normalized political violence in America. Within hours of the explosion, social media platforms erupted with celebrations from people who viewed the destruction as a victory against global conspiracies. Politicians who had campaigned on demolishing the monument claimed divine vindication. Religious leaders delivered sermons praising God's judgment on satanic symbols. But lost in all this celebration was a fundamental question. When did it become acceptable for anonymous bombers to decide which monuments deserve to exist? The Georgia Guidestones, regardless of your opinion about their message, were private property destroyed by an act of domestic terrorism. The fact that many Americans cheered this destruction reveals how far we've drifted from basic principles of law and order. The bomber's identity remains a mystery that grows more puzzling with each passing month. Despite having clear surveillance footage, a distinctive getaway vehicle, and significant law enforcement resources dedicated to the case, investigators have made no apparent progress. This failure raises uncomfortable questions about either the competence of our security agencies or the sophistication of whoever carried out the attack. Consider what we know about the bombing itself. The perpetrator approached the monument at exactly 4 a.m., the darkest and quietest time of night. They placed an explosive device with surgical precision at the base of one specific granite slab, then retreated to a waiting vehicle with practiced efficiency. The timing of the escape suggests advanced surveillance and careful route planning. The explosive device itself demonstrated technical knowledge that goes beyond what most amateur bombers possess. The blast was powerful enough to completely destroy a massive granite slab weighing over 20 tons, yet contained enough to avoid damaging the other stones or spreading debris across a wide area. This level of precision requires either significant expertise or access to professional-grade explosives. Yet somehow, this carefully planned and executed attack has produced no arrests, no credible suspects, and no apparent investigative leads. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation continues to classify the case as active, but their periodic updates contain no substantive information about progress toward identifying the perpetrator. 2 years later, It's as if the bomber simply vanished into thin air. This investigative failure becomes even more puzzling when you consider the resources available to modern law enforcement. The surveillance footage provides clear images of both the bomber and their vehicle. Digital forensics could potentially trace the explosive materials to their source. Cell phone data might reveal who was in the area at the time of the attack. Yet none of these investigative tools seem to have produced usable leads. The lack of progress has fueled additional conspiracy theories about the bombing itself. Some online commentators suggest that law enforcement agencies deliberately allowed the attack to proceed, viewing the controversial monument as more trouble than it was worth. Others claim the bombing was a false flag operation designed to justify increased surveillance powers or restrictions on domestic dissent. More disturbing are the theories suggesting that the bomber was a professional operative working for unknown sponsors, rather than a lone extremist motivated by political rhetoric. The precision of the attack, the clean escape, and the complete absence of investigative leads would be consistent with someone who had significant training and resources behind them. This possibility raises questions about whether the Georgia Guidestones bombing was actually domestic terrorism in the conventional sense, or something more sophisticated designed to appear as spontaneous political violence. If the attack was orchestrated by the same networks that originally funded the monument, it would explain both the precision of the operation and the failure to identify any suspects. The decision to immediately demolish the remaining structure, rather than attempting preservation or repair, adds another layer of mystery to the entire episode. Local authorities cited safety concerns about structural integrity, but engineering experts have questioned whether such drastic action was necessary. The complete destruction eliminated any possibility of forensic analysis that might have provided clues about the bombing. The speed of this decision was remarkable even by emergency response standards. Within hours of the explosion, heavy machinery was on site, reducing the remaining granite slabs to rubble. No time was allowed for proper assessment of damage or consideration of alternatives. The monument that had stood for 42 years was erased from existence in a single day. This haste served the interests of multiple parties who wanted the Guidestones controversy to disappear permanently. Local officials no longer had to deal with security concerns and negative publicity. State politicians could avoid uncomfortable questions about population control theories. Even federal agencies could close a file that had generated unwanted attention for decades. But the rapid demolition also eliminated evidence that might have been crucial to understanding both the bombing and the monument's original construction. The astronomical features that had required such precision to create were destroyed before experts could fully document their specifications. The granite itself, which might have contained clues about the original quarrying and construction process, was hauled away as generic rubble. The loss of this evidence represents more than just poor crisis management. It suggests a systematic effort to erase all traces of the Georgia Guidestones project. Combined with the destruction of documentation that was supposed to accompany the monument's completion, the bombing achieved something that decades of opposition had failed to accomplish: the complete elimination of physical evidence. This pattern of evidence destruction raises questions about whether the bombing was actually the final phase of a longer operation designed to spread eugenic ideology while maintaining plausible deniability for its sponsors. The monument had served its purpose for over 4 decades, but by 2022, it had become a liability as investigators closed in on R.C. Christian's true identity. The timing of the attack, coming just as journalistic investigations were exposing Herbert Kirsten's connection to the project, seems too convenient to be coincidental. The bombing eliminated the monument just as its association with discredited eugenic movements was becoming public knowledge. This prevented the permanent damage to the project's credibility that would have resulted from widespread understanding of its true origins. The celebration of the bombing by conspiracy theorists and political extremists provided perfect cover for what might have been a carefully orchestrated operation. By framing the attack as righteous opposition to satanic symbols, the true perpetrators could hide behind a narrative of grassroots resistance while achieving their actual goal of eliminating compromising evidence. The rapid disappearance of the story from public consciousness also suggests coordination rather than natural forgetting. Major domestic terrorism incidents typically generate sustained media coverage and political attention, but the Guidestones bombing was quickly overshadowed by other events and allowed to fade from memory. This collective amnesia serves the interests of whoever was behind the original monument project. By allowing the bombing to be forgotten, we avoid asking difficult questions about how such a sophisticated operation could succeed in maintaining anonymity for over 4 decades. We don't examine the networks that provided funding, planning, and construction expertise for the project. The failure to solve the bombing case also prevents investigation into potential connections between the monument's creators and its destroyer. If the same networks were responsible for both the construction and destruction of the Guidestones, it would reveal a level of long-term planning and operational security that should concern anyone interested in protecting democratic institutions. The techniques demonstrated in the Georgia Guidestones operation could be replicated against other targets with similar effectiveness. Anonymous funding could create controversial symbols designed to generate specific political responses. Conspiracy theories could be deliberately cultivated to build opposition movements. Strategic destruction could eliminate evidence while creating martyrdom narratives. The success of this operation in avoiding accountability suggests that similar projects might already be underway. The same networks that spent decades spreading eugenic ideology through the Guidestones could be working on other influence operations designed to shape American political discourse in ways we don't yet recognize. The normalization of political violence represented by the celebration of the bombing creates an environment where such operations become more likely to succeed. When public figures openly call for destroying controversial symbols and then celebrate when unknown perpetrators carry out those attacks, it provides perfect cover for organized operations masquerading as spontaneous extremism. The vulnerability of isolated monuments and symbolic structures to ideologically motivated attacks was clearly demonstrated by the Guidestones bombing. Thousands of similar targets across the United States lack the security resources necessary to prevent determined attackers from carrying out similar operations. This vulnerability extends beyond physical monuments to include digital infrastructure, communication networks, and information systems that could be targeted by adversaries seeking to influence American political discourse. The techniques used against the Guidestones represent just one approach to undermining democratic institutions through strategic manipulation and violence. The lesson we should draw from the Georgia Guidestones isn't that conspiracy theories are always wrong, or that controversial monuments should be protected regardless of their message. Instead, we should recognize how sophisticated adversaries can exploit our political divisions and cultural anxieties to achieve long-term strategic objectives while maintaining complete anonymity. The 42-year lifespan of the monument demonstrates that such operations can succeed in hiding their true nature for decades while gradually influencing public opinion and political movements. The precision of its destruction shows how evidence can be eliminated and investigations stalled when perpetrators have sufficient resources and planning capabilities. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire Guidestones saga is how it reveals the limitations of our security and intelligence systems when confronting patient, well-funded adversaries who understand how to operate within the boundaries of democratic societies. The techniques used in this operation could be applied to other objectives without fear of detection or accountability. The investigation into the monuments bombing officially remains active, but the complete lack of progress after more than 2 years suggests that the case may never be solved. The perpetrators have successfully covered their tracks and eliminated the evidence that might have exposed their true identities and motivations. This failure represents more than just one unsolved crime. It demonstrates how democratic societies can be vulnerable to manipulation by hidden networks with long-term agendas and sophisticated operational capabilities. The Georgia Guidestones operation succeeded because it understood how to exploit our assumptions about anonymous philanthropy, grassroots political movements, and spontaneous acts of extremism. The eugenic ideology that inspired the monument hasn't disappeared with its physical destruction. Those principles continue to circulate through online communities and influence political movements that seek to control population growth, restrict immigration, and eliminate people they consider genetically or culturally inferior. The ideas carved into granite have found new platforms in digital spaces where they can spread without the obvious associations that made the monument controversial. The networks that funded and planned the original Guidestones project likely continue to operate with other objectives and methods. The successful completion of their 42-year operation provides a template for future influence campaigns that could target different aspects of American political culture with similar effectiveness. The celebration of the monument's destruction by mainstream political figures demonstrates how easily such operations can manipulate legitimate political movements for their own purposes. The religious and patriotic rhetoric used to justify the bombing provided perfect cover for what may have been a calculated act designed to eliminate compromising evidence. The rapid forgetting of the bombing by American society shows how such operations can avoid sustained scrutiny by timing their actions to coincide with other distracting events. The news cycle's short attention span creates opportunities for sophisticated adversaries to carry out significant operations without generating the kind of sustained investigation that might expose their true nature. The technical precision of the bombing, combined with the complete failure to identify any suspects, suggests capabilities that go beyond what typical domestic extremists possess. The operation required advanced surveillance, professional-grade explosives, precise timing, and sophisticated escape planning that indicate significant resources and expertise. The fact that no credible extremist groups have claimed responsibility for the attack also differs from typical domestic terrorism incidents. Most bombers who are motivated by ideological grievances want their actions to inspire others and spread their message. The complete silence surrounding the Guidestones bombing suggests different motivations and objectives. The strategic value of destroying the monument at precisely the moment when its eugenic origins were being exposed cannot be overstated. The bombing prevented what would have been permanent damage to the credibility of population control movements by eliminating their most visible symbol before it could be definitively associated with discredited racial theories. This timing suggests that whoever ordered the bombing had access to information about the journalistic investigations that were closing in on Herbert Kirsten's identity. Such intelligence would require either penetration of media organizations or surveillance of the investigators themselves, indicating capabilities beyond those of typical extremist groups. The coordination required to plan and execute the bombing while simultaneously ensuring rapid demolition of the remaining structure suggests an operation that involved multiple participants with different specialties. The bomber who placed the device was likely just one component of a larger network that included surveillance specialists, logistics coordinators, and intelligence analysts. The successful maintenance of operational security throughout this complex operation demonstrates sophisticated training and discipline that is typically associated with professional intelligence services rather than amateur extremist groups. The complete absence of communications intercepts, digital footprints, or human intelligence suggests capabilities that few non-state actors possess. The implications of this analysis extend far beyond the specific case of the Georgia Guidestones. If domestic adversaries can successfully carry out complex operations involving monument construction, decades-long influence campaigns, and precision demolition while avoiding detection and accountability, it raises serious questions about our ability to protect democratic institutions from sophisticated manipulation. The techniques demonstrated in the Guidestones operation could be applied to other strategic objectives with potentially devastating effects on American political stability. Anonymous funding of controversial projects, cultivation of opposition movements, and strategic elimination of evidence represent a playbook that could be used against multiple targets simultaneously. The normalization of political violence that resulted from celebrating the bombing creates an environment where future operations become easier to disguise as spontaneous extremism. When unknown bombers can receive public praise from elected officials, it provides perfect cover for organized campaigns masquerading as grassroots resistance. The failure of law enforcement and intelligence agencies to solve such a high-profile case suggests serious gaps in our security capabilities that adversaries could exploit for other operations. The complete lack of progress in identifying the Guidestones bomber indicates either incompetence or the presence of capabilities that our agencies are not equipped to counter. The rapid forgetting of the bombing by American society demonstrates how sophisticated adversaries can time their operations to avoid sustained scrutiny. The news cycle's short attention span creates windows of opportunity for carrying out significant operations without generating the kind of investigation that might expose larger networks and objectives. The success of the Georgia Guidestones operation in achieving its apparent objectives while avoiding accountability represents a template that could inspire similar campaigns targeting other aspects of American political culture. The techniques used in this 42-year project could be replicated with different messages and objectives, creating multiple simultaneous influence operations that would be difficult to detect or counter. The eugenic ideology that inspired the original monument continues to influence political movements and policy discussions in ways that are often not recognized or acknowledged. The population control theories carved into the Guidestones have found expression in contemporary debates about immigration, healthcare rationing, and environmental policy, suggesting that the operation's influence extends far beyond the monument itself. The networks that funded and planned the Guidestones project likely possessed the resources and patience to undertake multiple similar operations simultaneously. The 42-year timeline of the monument suggests adversaries who think in terms of decades rather than election cycles, making them particularly dangerous to democratic institutions that operate on much shorter time horizons. The precision and sophistication of both the monument's construction and its destruction indicate access to technical expertise and financial resources that few organizations possess. The astronomical features required consultation with professional astronomers, while the bombing required knowledge of explosives and operational security that suggests military or intelligence training. The successful maintenance of anonymity throughout the entire operation, from initial construction through final destruction, demonstrates operational security capabilities that rival those of state intelligence services. The fact that Herbert Kirsten's identity was only discovered through accidental preservation of documents suggests that the network behind the project was prepared for much more thorough evidence destruction than actually occurred. The celebration of the bombing by conspiracy theorists and political extremists provided perfect cover for what may have been a professionally planned operation designed to eliminate compromising evidence. The narrative of righteous opposition to satanic symbols allowed the true perpetrators to hide behind genuine grassroots sentiment while achieving their strategic objectives. The rapid demolition of the remaining structure eliminated any possibility of forensic analysis that might have provided clues about either the bombing or the original construction. This suggests coordination between the bombers and local authorities, or at minimum, an understanding that the bombing would trigger immediate demolition of the entire monument. The failure to preserve any components of the monument for historical or investigative purposes represents a lost opportunity to understand both the technical achievement of its construction and the methods used in its destruction. The complete elimination of physical evidence serves the interests of whoever wanted the Guidestones project to disappear without leaving traces that could be analyzed. The story of the Georgia Guidestones, from their mysterious construction to their violent destruction, serves as a case study in how sophisticated adversaries can manipulate democratic societies over extended periods, while maintaining complete anonymity and avoiding accountability for their actions. The success of this operation should concern anyone interested in protecting American political institutions from similar forms of manipulation and control. The techniques pioneered in the Guidestones operation continue to threaten our society in ways we're only beginning to understand. The combination of anonymous funding, conspiracy theory cultivation, and strategic violence represents a playbook that could be used against multiple targets with devastating effects on democratic governance and social stability. The investigation into the monument's bombing may never be solved, leaving us with questions about who was really behind both its construction and destruction. But the lessons of the Georgia Guidestones remain relevant as we confront new forms of information warfare and psychological manipulation designed to undermine democratic institutions and spread dangerous ideologies. The war between those who seek to control population growth through manipulation and violence and those who defend human dignity and democratic values continues, with the stakes higher than ever before. The Georgia Guidestones represented just one battle in this larger conflict, but their story reveals tactics and capabilities that we ignore at our own peril. The destruction of the Georgia Guidestones has left us with more questions than answers, but perhaps that was always the point. As I've researched this case over the past 6 months, I've come to believe that we're not dealing with a simple story of extremist vandalism. We're looking at something far more sophisticated, something that challenges our understanding of how power operates in the shadows of American society. Consider this timeline. In 1979, a mysterious figure appears with substantial financial resources and detailed plans for a monument encoding population control ideology. For 42 years, this structure serves as a recruitment tool and propaganda platform for eugenic theories. Then, just as journalists finally identify the monument's creator and expose his connections to white supremacist movements, an unknown bomber destroys the evidence and disappears without a trace. The precision of this sequence suggests planning that extends far beyond the actions of a lone extremist, motivated by religious or political grievances. We're looking at an operation that spans multiple decades, involves sophisticated technical capabilities, and demonstrates operational security that rivals professional intelligence services. The financial arrangements alone should raise red flags for anyone familiar with how complex operations are funded and executed. R.C. Christian, whom we now know was likely Herbert Kirsten, had immediate access to over $100,000 in 1980 dollars. This wasn't money saved from a medical practice in rural Iowa. This was funding that appeared without financing, corporate backing, or traceable paper trails. Such financial capabilities suggest an organization rather than an individual. Kirsten may have been the public face of the project, but someone else was providing the resources and coordination necessary to execute such an ambitious undertaking. The monument required consultation with astronomers, master craftsmen, linguists, and construction specialists. No single person, regardless of their wealth, could have possessed all the expertise necessary to create the Guidestones. The selection of languages for the inscriptions provides another clue about the scope of this operation. The 8 modern languages chosen represent most of humanity, while the 4 ancient languages on the capstone connect the monument to historical civilizations. This wasn't a random selection made by an amateur enthusiast. It required deep knowledge of linguistics, cultural significance, and global demographics. The astronomical features demonstrate even more sophisticated planning. The alignments necessary to track lunar cycles, solar movements, and stellar positions require mathematical precision that goes far beyond typical monument construction. Someone with professional knowledge of celestial mechanics designed these features, suggesting access to academic or government expertise in astronomical sciences. But perhaps most revealing is the monument's location selection. The site in rural Georgia wasn't chosen for convenience or cost savings. It was positioned to survive potential nuclear attacks on major population centers while remaining accessible to whoever might emerge from civilizational collapse. This strategic thinking reflects military planning rather than philanthropic monument building. The choice of granite as a construction material also reveals long-term strategic thinking. This wasn't about creating an impressive landmark for contemporary visitors. The monument was built to survive for millennia, serving as guidance for future generations who might discover it after current civilization had collapsed. The durability of granite ensures that the eugenic message would persist even if the society that created it was destroyed. The astronomical alignments would allow future survivors to re-establish calendars and agricultural cycles necessary for rebuilding civilization. The multiple languages would enable diverse populations to understand the message, regardless of which groups survived hypothetical catastrophes. The principles themselves provide a framework for reorganizing society according to eugenic theories. This isn't the work of a single eccentric physician with unusual ideas about population control. This is evidence of a network that believed civilizational collapse was inevitable and wanted to ensure their ideology would guide whatever emerged from the ruins. The monument represents preparation for scenarios that most people prefer not to contemplate. The bombing that destroyed the Guidestones demonstrates similar levels of sophistication and planning. The perpetrator approached the monument at precisely the optimal time for avoiding detection. They placed an explosive device with surgical precision, then escaped without leaving investigative leads, despite operating under surveillance. This level of operational security suggests professional training rather than amateur extremism. The explosive device itself reveals technical knowledge that goes beyond what most domestic terrorists possess. The blast was powerful enough to completely destroy a 20-ton granite slab, while avoiding collateral damage to surrounding structures. This precision requires either significant expertise in demolitions or access to military-grade explosives and training. Yet somehow, this carefully planned and executed attack has produced no arrests, no credible suspects, and no apparent investigative progress. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation continues to classify the case as active, but their periodic updates contain no substantive information about identifying the perpetrator. 2 years later, the bomber remains as anonymous as the monument's original creator. This investigative failure becomes even more puzzling when you consider the resources available to modern law enforcement. Digital forensics, cell phone data analysis, explosive material tracing, and advanced surveillance techniques should have produced usable leads. The complete absence of progress suggests either massive investigative incompetence or the presence of capabilities designed to counter standard law enforcement methods. The decision to immediately demolish the remaining structure, rather than attempting preservation, adds another layer of mystery to the entire episode. Local authorities cited safety concerns, but engineering experts have questioned whether such drastic action was necessary. The complete destruction eliminated any possibility of forensic analysis that might have provided crucial evidence about both the bombing and the original construction. The speed of this demolition was remarkable even by emergency response standards. Within hours of the explosion, heavy machinery was on site, reducing 42 years of mystery to rubble. No time was allowed for proper damage assessment or consideration of alternatives. The monument that had survived decades of controversy was erased from existence in a single day. This haste served multiple interests beyond simple safety concerns. Local officials no longer had to deal with security issues and negative publicity. State politicians could avoid uncomfortable questions about eugenic ideology. Federal agencies could close files that had generated unwanted attention for decades. The rapid demolition ensured that the Guidestones controversy would disappear permanently. But the elimination of evidence also prevented investigation into connections between the monument's construction and destruction. The granite itself might have contained clues about quarrying techniques, construction methods, or materials sourcing that could have revealed information about the original network behind the project. The astronomical features represented irreplaceable craftsmanship that deserved preservation, regardless of political opinions about the monument's message. The loss of this evidence suggests coordination between those who ordered the bombing and those who authorized the demolition. whether through direct communication or simply shared interests in eliminating the controversy. The result was complete destruction of physical evidence that might have revealed uncomfortable truths about the monument's origins and purpose. The celebration of the bombing by political figures and conspiracy theorists provided perfect cover for what may have been a professionally planned operation. The narrative of righteous opposition to satanic symbols allowed sophisticated operatives to hide behind genuine grassroots sentiment while achieving strategic objectives that had nothing to do with religious concerns. Candace Taylor's gubernatorial campaign, which promised to demolish the Guidestones if elected, created an environment where their destruction would be viewed as political victory rather than criminal activity. Her rhetoric about divine judgment and spiritual warfare provided ideological justification for violence against the monument while distancing the actual perpetrators from responsibility for their actions. The rapid disappearance of the bombing story from news coverage and public consciousness also suggests coordination rather than natural forgetting. Major domestic terrorism incidents typically generate sustained media attention and political discussion, but the Guidestones case was quickly overshadowed by other events and allowed to fade from memory. This collective amnesia serves the interests of whoever was behind the original monument project. By allowing the bombing to be forgotten, we avoid asking difficult questions about how such a sophisticated operation maintained anonymity for over 4 decades. We don't examine the networks that provided funding, expertise, and coordination for the project. The timing of the attack, coming just as investigative journalists were exposing Herbert Kirsten's identity and ideological connections, seems too convenient to be coincidental. The bombing eliminated the monument just as its association with eugenic movements was becoming public knowledge. This prevented permanent damage to population control advocacy that would have resulted from widespread understanding of the monument's true origins. The techniques demonstrated in the Georgia Guidestones operation could be replicated against other targets with similar effectiveness. Anonymous funding could create controversial symbols designed to generate specific political responses. Opposition movements could be cultivated through conspiracy theory promotion. Strategic destruction could eliminate evidence while creating martyrdom narratives that serve larger propaganda purposes. The success of this operation in avoiding accountability suggests that similar projects might already be underway. The same networks that spent decades spreading eugenic ideology through the Guidestones could be working on other influence campaigns designed to shape American political discourse in ways we don't yet recognize or understand. The normalization of political violence represented by celebrating the bombing creates an environment where such operations become more likely to succeed. When public figures openly call for destroying controversial symbols and then praise unknown perpetrators who carry out those attacks, it provides perfect cover for organized campaigns masquerading as spontaneous extremism. The vulnerability of isolated monuments and symbolic structures to ideologically motivated attacks was clearly demonstrated by the Guidestones bombing. Thousands of similar targets across the United States lack the security resources necessary to prevent determined attackers from carrying out comparable operations against other controversial symbols or landmarks. This vulnerability extends beyond physical monuments to include digital infrastructure, communication networks, and information systems that could be targeted by adversaries seeking to influence American political discourse through strategic manipulation and controlled destruction of evidence. The lesson we should draw from the Georgia Guidestones isn't simply that conspiracy theories sometimes contain elements of truth, or that controversial monuments require better protection. Instead, we should recognize how sophisticated adversaries can exploit our political divisions and cultural anxieties to achieve long-term strategic objectives while maintaining complete anonymity and avoiding accountability. The 42-year lifespan of the monument demonstrates that such operations can succeed in hiding their true nature for decades, while gradually influencing public opinion and political movements. The precision of its destruction shows how evidence can be eliminated and investigations stalled when perpetrators possess sufficient resources and professional capabilities. the investigation into the monument's bombing officially remains active, but the complete lack of progress after more than 2 years suggests that the case may never be solved. The perpetrators have successfully covered their tracks and eliminated evidence that might have exposed their true identities, motivations, and organizational connections. This failure represents more than just one unsolved crime. It demonstrates how democratic societies can be vulnerable to manipulation by hidden networks with long-term agendas and sophisticated operational capabilities that exploit our assumptions about anonymous philanthropy, grassroots political movements, and spontaneous acts of domestic extremism. The eugenic ideology that inspired the monument hasn't disappeared with its physical destruction. Those principles continue to circulate through online communities and influence political movements that seek to control population growth, restrict immigration, and eliminate people they consider genetically, culturally, or economically inferior to their preferred demographic groups. The networks that funded and planned the original Guidestones project likely continue to operate with different objectives and methods. The successful completion of their 42-year operation provides a template for future influence campaigns that could target other aspects of American political culture with similar effectiveness and anonymity. The technical precision of the bombing, combined with the complete failure to identify any suspects, suggests capabilities that go beyond what typical domestic extremists possess. The operation required advanced surveillance, professional-grade explosives, precise timing, sophisticated escape planning, and coordination with parties who could ensure rapid demolition of remaining evidence. The fact that no credible extremist groups have claimed responsibility for the attack also differs from typical domestic terrorism incidents. Most ideologically motivated bombers want their actions to inspire others and spread their message through public acknowledgement of their grievances. The complete silence surrounding the Guidestones bombing suggests different motivations and objectives. The strategic value of destroying the monument at precisely the moment when its eugenic origins were being exposed cannot be overstated. The bombing prevented what would have been permanent damage to the credibility of population control movements by eliminating their most visible symbol before it could be definitively associated with discredited racial theories and white supremacist ideology. This timing suggests that whoever ordered the bombing had access to information about journalistic investigations that were closing in on Herbert Kirsten's identity and ideological connections. Such intelligence would require either penetration of media organizations or surveillance of investigators themselves, indicating capabilities that extend far beyond those of typical extremist groups. The coordination required to plan and execute the bombing, while simultaneously ensuring rapid demolition of the remaining structure, suggests an operation that involved multiple participants with different specialties and responsibilities. The individual who placed the explosive device was likely just one component of a larger network that included surveillance specialists, logistics coordinators, intelligence analysts, and political operatives. The successful maintenance of operational security throughout this complex operation demonstrates sophisticated training and discipline that is typically associated with professional intelligence services, rather than amateur extremist organizations. The complete absence of communications intercepts, digital footprints, or human intelligence suggests capabilities that few non-state actors possess. The implications of this analysis extend far beyond the specific case of the Georgia Guidestones. If domestic adversaries can successfully carry out complex operations involving monument construction, decades-long influence campaigns, and precision demolition while avoiding detection and accountability, it raises serious questions about our ability to protect democratic institutions from sophisticated manipulation and control. The techniques demonstrated in the Guidestones operation could be applied to other strategic objectives with potentially devastating effects on American political stability and social cohesion. Anonymous funding of controversial projects, cultivation of opposition movements through conspiracy theory promotion, and strategic elimination of evidence represent a playbook that could be used against multiple targets simultaneously. The celebration of political violence that resulted from praising the bombing creates an environment where future operations become easier to disguise as spontaneous extremism. When unknown bombers can receive public support from elected officials and religious leaders, it provides perfect cover for organized campaigns masquerading as grassroots resistance to perceived threats. The failure of law enforcement and intelligence agencies to solve such a high-profile case suggests serious gaps in our security capabilities that adversaries could exploit for other operations, targeting critical infrastructure, symbolic landmarks, or democratic institutions. The complete lack of progress in identifying the Guidestones bomber indicates either systemic incompetence or the presence of capabilities that our agencies are not equipped to detect or counter. The rapid forgetting of the bombing by American society demonstrates how sophisticated adversaries can time their operations to avoid sustained scrutiny and investigation. The news cycle's short attention span creates windows of opportunity for carrying out significant operations without generating the kind of prolonged examination that might expose larger networks and strategic objectives. The success of the Georgia Guidestones operation in achieving its apparent objectives while avoiding accountability represents a template that could inspire similar campaigns targeting other aspects of American political culture, democratic institutions, or social movements. The techniques used in this 42-year project could be replicated with different messages and objectives, creating multiple, simultaneous influence operations that would be extremely difficult to detect or counter effectively. As we've seen throughout this investigation, the story of the Georgia Guidestones reveals uncomfortable truths about the vulnerability of democratic societies to patient, well-funded adversaries who understand how to exploit our cultural divisions and political processes for their own purposes. The monument's construction, controversial existence, and violent destruction represent a masterclass in long-term strategic manipulation that should concern anyone interested in protecting American democratic institutions from similar forms of covert influence and control. The techniques pioneered in the Guidestones operation continue to threaten our society in ways we're only beginning to understand and acknowledge. The combination of anonymous funding, ideological messaging, conspiracy theory cultivation, and strategic violence represents capabilities that could be deployed against multiple targets with devastating effects on democratic governance, social stability, and public trust in institutions. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire saga is how it demonstrates the limitations of our security and intelligence systems when confronting adversaries who think in terms of decades rather than election cycles, who possess the patience and resources to execute complex operations while maintaining complete anonymity and avoiding accountability for their actions. The investigation into the monument's bombing may never be solved, leaving us with unanswered questions about who was really behind both its construction and destruction. But the lessons of the Georgia Guidestones remain critically relevant as we confront new forms of information warfare, psychological manipulation, and strategic violence designed to undermine democratic institutions and spread dangerous ideologies through American society. The war between those who seek to control human populations through manipulation and violence and those who defend human dignity and democratic values continues with stakes that grow higher each year. The Georgia Guidestones represented just one battle in this larger conflict, but their story reveals tactics and capabilities that we ignore at our own peril. The networks that created and destroyed the monument likely continue to operate with other objectives, using refined versions of the same techniques that proved so successful in the Guidestones operation. As we move forward, we must remain vigilant against similar forms of manipulation, while working to strengthen the democratic institutions and cultural values that make such operations more difficult to execute successfully. The true legacy of the Georgia Guidestones isn't just the controversy they generated, or the conspiracy theories they inspired. It's the demonstration that sophisticated adversaries can successfully manipulate American political discourse for decades, while maintaining complete anonymity and avoiding accountability for their actions. That lesson remains relevant today as we confront new threats to democratic governance and social stability that operate using similar methods and capabilities. The story I've told you tonight is based on documented facts, verified through official records, investigative journalism, and careful analysis of available evidence. But it's also a warning about the sophisticated nature of threats facing democratic societies in an era when information warfare, psychological manipulation, and strategic violence have become tools of political influence and social control. If you found this investigation valuable, please subscribe and share it with others who need to understand these realities. The techniques revealed through the Georgia Guidestones case are being used against other targets and objectives right now, and public awareness remains our best defense against manipulation by hidden networks, with agendas that serve their own interests rather than democratic values or human dignity. The bombing that destroyed America's most mysterious monument may have eliminated one symbol of eugenic ideology, but it also demonstrated the ongoing power of those who remain hidden in the shadows, shaping events according to their own vision of humanity's future. The questions raised by the Georgia Guidestones will continue to challenge us as we work to protect democratic institutions from similar forms of sophisticated manipulation and control. Until we meet again, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember that the most dangerous secrets are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the courage to ask the right questions and pursue the truth wherever it leads, no matter how uncomfortable or challenging that truth might be.